Good evening, everybody. I'm glad you are joining us today for our study in 1 Timothy. We're in 1 Timothy chapter 5, and just for us to remember the context, as hopefully we're all inside and staying warm and keeping out of Snowmageddon 2021, we are in 1 Timothy chapter 5, and remember this whole book, Paul is writing to his friend. He's really a mentor to the young preacher Timothy, who's working in Ephesus, a group of individuals that Paul really, really loves. He really cares for, and he's encouraging Timothy to stay strong. Paul understands, and we know this from Acts chapter 20. We know this from John's writing to them in Revelation chapters 2 and 3, that Ephesus is going to be facing some false doctrine. And they're going to be facing a lot of problems. And Paul loves these people. And so he leaves Timothy there to work with them. And now he's encouraging Timothy to keep the truth pure, to protect the truth. And all throughout the book, we're seeing Paul encourage Timothy in different ways to protect the truth. And so here, he's going to begin to talk about in chapter 5, how do we treat one another? And as we treat one another, that's part of protecting the truth. We're encouraging one another, and we're helping one another. We're lifting one another up. And so that's what Paul does here. Now, if we're going to notice in chapter 5, Paul does something that he's been doing throughout the book, and that is breaking individuals down into demographics. If you go back to chapter 2, he talks about men and women and how they're to act in the worship assemblies. When you get into chapter 3, he talks about leaders and the different types of leaders, the elders and the deacons, again, breaking them down by demographics. And so now he's going to do that here too. And in verses 1 and 2 of chapter 5, which we want to hit today, just very quickly, this is going to be a very short class due to the weather and everything. But anyway, in chapter 5, verses 1 and 2, he's going to break them down by age. Now, as we go through the chapter, again, he's going to talk about widows. And he's going to break them down by demographics. And then he's going to talk about elders. And these are the leaders of the church. And he's going to break them down. So he's breaking individuals down into demographics on how do you treat these different demographics and how do you help them and what's the best way to encourage them. And so in chapter 5, verses 1 and 2, let's read what he says here. He says, "Do not rebuke an older man, but exhort him as a father, young men as brothers, older women as mothers, young women as sisters, with all purity." Okay, now let's break this down. There's really 4 groups, but we're going to break it down into 2 because Paul separates them out between men and women, and then older and younger. So technically 4 groups he's talking about, but when we look at it, the older men, older women, we're to treat the same. The younger men and younger women, we're to treat the same, and we'll make some comments about that as we go along. So let's take the older first. Now, some versions say elder. Treat the elders with. And we want to, anytime we see the word elders, especially within the church, we want to go directly to the leadership. And he's not talking about the leadership here. He is talking about individuals who have some age on them, some maturity. So how do we treat the older members of the congregation? Well, what does that mean, older? I mean, if I'm 10 years old, I look at someone like me who's 46, and I'm thinking, well, he's a decrepit old man. If you're 30, you may think that of someone who's 50 or 60. If you're 50, you may think of that of someone who's 70 or 80. And so what does it mean, older? Older just kind of becomes a generic term, but depending on how old we are is how we're going to take that. Well, that's not really true in regards to the word here. When we talk about older, generally speaking, in New Testament times, someone who is older was over the age of 60. And so that's who we're talking about here. Paul's breaking down the individuals, members of the church, to those who are over 60 and those who are under 60. And so older, younger. And that's the demographic breaking point here. And the same is true when we get to widows next week as we look through 3 through 16. So we're talking about individuals who are over 60, individuals who are under 60, both men and women. So how do I deal with individuals? And now remember, he's talking to a preacher here. Here's one who is trying to train the church, edify the church, build the church up, and he's doing the work of God within this group of individuals. But the principles here would apply really to all the members, not just the preacher, not just Timothy to them, but everybody. How we treat each other, and the way we treat each other helps us to protect the truth. So anyway, okay, going back to here, the demographics, older versus younger, men versus women. Well, the older men and older women, there's specifics here. He says, first of all, there's a negative. Don't rebuke the older. Don't rebuke the older man. Okay, now, that doesn't mean never correct individuals. I've heard individuals teach that. You aren't to correct somebody. Because, well, no, hold on. If I see a brother or sister, despite their age, in sin, I need to help them get out of that sin. I need to have that desire. I don't want to see them lost. I don't want to see them hurt in any way. So I'm protective of my brothers and sisters in Christ, and because of that, I want to correct them. So the idea of not rebuking somebody, it doesn't mean don't correct them. We are to correct one another when we find each other in sinful situations, especially. And so what does it mean not to rebuke? The idea of rebuke is a severe correction. Okay, here's this little boy, let's say a 3-year-old, maybe a grandson, your son, nephew, niece, whatever. And they're reaching for that stove. That's kind of the classic example, right? Well, what do? You don't say, well, okay, little Johnny, don't touch that, and then go off into the other room as he slams his hand on the hot stove. And of course not. You want to jerk him away from it, right? Well, that's the idea of rebuke. It's the idea to scorn in a very severe way. In other words, you get right up in their face and you say, hey, you don't do that. No. It's rebuking, okay? It's severe. It would be to correct in a reprimanding kind of way, as if a parent would correct a child. The idea very severely. You don't treat the older people like that. You don't treat them like that. Instead, you exhort them. Exhort them. If you remember back in the book of Job, of course, is suffering all of these different things. And he has 3 friends, they say supposed friends, but they cared enough about him to go talk to him. It's just they were wrong in that they were convinced that Job was in some kind of sin, and God's angry with him. And so God's smiting Job and backhanding him because of all the sin in his life. And evidently it was hidden because he seemed to be a very holy man. And so the 3 friends are conversing back and forth, and this is that poetic portion of the book of Job that is a little hard to understand sometimes. And then there's a 4th man, a younger man. Notice this, younger man. And so he wasn't a peer of Job. He was just along for the ride. And then he begins, and he talks to Job in the most hateful way. He's the harshest one to Job. And it gets to the point, while he's talking, God interrupts him and basically tells him, hey, shut up. I'm sick of hearing about you. So God gets to the point where, hey, this is out of place. Stop it. And then God intervenes, and Job begins a conversation with God. It's that idea. You don't go up and jump down someone's throat simply because they're wrong if they're older than you. Okay, so that's the negative side of this. This is how you don't treat the older, those who are more mature, more spiritually mature, or more mature with age, rather. So how do you treat them? Well, Paul says, exhort them like a father, older women as mothers. You treat them like your parents. If your parents are wrong, what are you going to do? Well, we have too much respect for them to jump down their throats. We don't do that. We exhort them. Okay, well, what does it mean to exhort? Exhort is this idea of to appeal to encourage. But in this context, it really means to appeal to. You speak to them reasonably. And hopefully the idea is that they're going to be older and therefore spiritually mature enough to react reasonably to your correction. Okay, so you exhort them. You go gently to them. And I would say that for most of us who are in the church especially, that's how we need to be treating one another. Don't jump down people's throats. First of all, when we jump down someone's throat, a lot of times we're assuming things. You know, 1 Corinthians 13, we kind of roll our eyes when we go to the love chapter. Oh, here we go, lovey-dovey, lovey. But no, in all seriousness, there's some good principles there that we need to apply that if you look especially on social media, and a lot of times in our interaction with one another, we don't apply. You know, love believes all things. What does that mean? It means that if you love somebody, you give them the benefit of the doubt. Now, if you're faced with evidence right in front of you that something's going on, you don't ignore the, cold stone evidence that, right there, but you give them the benefit of the doubt. So if you perceive something that you think is sinful, for instance, maybe something said in a lesson, and you think, well, that could go one of two ways, what he said there. Did he mean it? Well, you give them the benefit of the doubt. And you do that until you know for sure the evidence says. So let's say someone says something wrong or in a wrong way, you give them the benefit of the doubt of it. You don't go up to them and jump down their throat. No, maybe go up and ask them a couple of questions. Well, what did you mean by this? What did you mean by that? And so it's this idea of treating one another in a way where you're appealing to one another instead of just stubbornly and just hatefully jumping down their throats and trying to correct them in that way. Now, okay, that's the older demographic, though, and I think you could take those principles really to any age, but specifically the older ones, that's how we're to treat them. The younger, we're to treat as brothers and sisters, and this is familial siblings. In other words, when individuals will say brothers and sisters, they're talking about, and they would use this terminology, they're talking about you treat them as if you would treat your peers. You don't look down on them. We have a bad habit of the church. There's always a group in every single congregation I've ever been in, and no exception. There's always been a group where you have, I like to call them the church lady group. If you remember Saturday Night Live back in the late 80s, Dana Carvey had this character. He would dress up as this older woman, and he called himself the church lady. And they had this little talk show called Church Chat. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, look it up on YouTube. There's all kinds of skits on there. Very, very funny. But it was this very, very puritanical and just staunch and, I'm better than you, and he had this very funny voice and everything. And he would say, oh, well, isn't that special? And really talk down to the guests on the talk show in this superior way. Well, when we treat each other as peers, we're not going to act like a church lady to them. And that's what I mean by that. This is the individual who's constantly looking down their nose at everybody. Oh, I'm so superior than you. My life is so much holier than you. And, oh, look at the way they're dressed. And, oh, look at the way they're holding themselves. And, oh, look at the way they're... No, you don't do that. First of all, that's not Christian. It's very hypocritical. In fact, Jesus called individuals such as that hypocrites all throughout the gospel accounts as he dealt with the Pharisees who had that church lady vibe to them. Look at how holy we are, and we're ignoring the law of God because our traditions are better than yours. And this would also go back to Matthew 7. Jesus says, don't throw one another away. That's the word judge, krino, to sift away, to throw out. And it's the idea you don't throw someone away. And so you don't judge them. That doesn't mean you don't disagree with them. You don't throw them away. And then he talks about the mote and the splinter, the beam and the splinter. You have a beam in your eye and you're trying to get the splinter out. Don't forget, you look down at everybody else because of their sin, and yet there's sin in your life as well. And the idea is, he's not saying ignore sin. He's saying don't think you're better than anybody else, because there's sin in your life too. Now, their sin might be worn to where it's a public nature and it's on their shoulder and everybody knows about it, and your sin might be in a closet somewhere. But there's still sin in your life. You're not exempt from it. And so you need to treat each other like peers. You treat each other like peers. You don't look down on each other. And man, there's a problem with that in the church. It drives people away. It hurts people spiritually. The one who's doing the looking down and the one who's being looked down upon. We need to watch out for this. So he says you treat the younger like your brothers and sisters with peers. And there's a caveat to the younger women. He says with all purity. With all purity. And this is the idea And of course, Paul is appealing to purity all throughout this book. And the idea, you treat them with pure motives. In other words, you're not being catty with them. You're not trying to you don't have ulterior motives to fulfill physical desires with them. You treat them with all purity. And you hear about that all the time. Within leadership, within preaching positions, preachers running off with their secretaries, and youth ministers having affairs with, older high school girls there, or college age girls. And no. Paul says you keep yourself away from that. You treat them as if you were your sister. You're not going to treat your sister, your physical sister, in such a way where you're like a lech to them. You don't treat the women of the congregation like that. They're not there as your prey for you to prey upon. And we need to understand that. And again, that's a huge problem in the church among leadership positions, whether it's elders, deacons, or preachers, or youth ministers now. And of course, there's a minister for every little group now, it seems like. When people look up to you who are of the opposite sex, you need to understand a lot of times that can form an attraction. It's a natural thing that happens, and don't take advantage of that. And Paul is again talking to a young preacher, and he's acting like a mentor to him. And when someone comes to you with a problem, even if you're not in a leadership position, but it's a female going to a male with a problem, well, you know what? You need to put some safeguards up. And that may sound silly in this day and age, but you need to put some safeguards up, because that's not unheard of. I know of so many situations where it may be a husband and wife who are having problems, and so the wife becomes friendly with maybe another male member, and she feels like she can talk to him, and all of a sudden she feels closer to him than her own husband, because her husband's not listening, but he is, and he's giving me the emotional support that I need. And next thing you know, hey, they're hooking up over here, and it's causing a big scandal within the church. Stop it. You treat your sisters in Christ as if they were your physical sister. And unless there's something wrong with you in the head, you're not going to treat your physical sister that way, or at least I hope not. If so, you need counseling. So anyway, that's the first two verses of chapter 5. And again, we're cutting it short tonight. I see we're running at about 17, 18 minutes, so I'm going to go ahead and cut it short and get into some warmth. And I hope y'all are staying warm. And there is my AC. If you hear that squealing, that does that about every hour as it defrosts itself when it is cold and cuts itself off and drops the office about 5 degrees. So, and of course, it's going to do this while we're studying together. I hope you're enjoying this study. I like doing this, and it's kind of neat in this way because we can be a little bit more informal in a classroom setting. And have a little bit of fun with the text. And, when you're having fun with the text, you're learning the text. And I hope that's the goal of any Bible class. But especially, here it goes. Oh, just like clockwork. Okay, we're going to cut it off there. I don't know. We're planning on meeting Wednesday night at 7 o'clock. And Lord willing, we're going to be able to. I'm going to try and talk a little louder over the squealing. Lord willing, we'll be able to. But looking at the weather, and of course, the weather this far out, maybe it's wrong. Hope it is, but we're going to get a ton of snow overnight and into tomorrow. The temperatures are staying down, so I'm not very hopeful that the snow will melt, but we'll look at that, and I'll be in touch with the eldership, and they'll make that decision. And if we do cancel Wednesday nights, it will be sent out to the phone tree, and I'll put a post on Facebook as well, so you will hopefully get that. If you're not getting phone tree messages, let me know. It could be a problem with your number. I have very fat fingers, and they don't do well with keyboards a lot of times, and so I will inadvertently type a 6 instead of a 7, or a 7 instead of an 8, and on and on and on like that. And sometimes I just get in a hurry, and I've got 15 things going on in my mind, and I'll transpose numbers. I'm bad at that. So if you're not getting them for some reason, let me know, and we'll double check the number, or we'll double check to make sure you're in there. I think most everybody is. But sometimes, hey, things are overlooked, numbers get changed, so there could be many things wrong. Anyway, hopefully Wednesday night we'll be able to get back together. I know I'm missing y'all. We missed last Wednesday, we missed today. Virtual is great that we can continue our studies together and at least stay in touch a little bit, but it's just not the same as being in the same room together. But nevertheless, hopefully Wednesday night we'll be able to get to, if something happens weather-wise, if the parking lot is in bad shape still, which I'm really scared that it will be, we'll have to cancel. But again, we'll let you know if that's the case. But we're planning on being here Wednesday night at 7. And then Saturday is supposed to be in the 40s. So I'm hoping all of this stuff that's coming this week is going to melt away. I know you are too. It's always such a hassle. It's pretty, but it is a hassle. So Lord willing, Sunday, 10 o'clock, we'll be able to worship together. And we'll conclude our series on the ABCs of salvation. A, available. Salvation is made available by grace. B, the benefits of being justified. And then C will be Sunday morning if we meet live. Salvation is conditional by faith. And so that's where we're going there. Hope everyone has a great week. Stay warm. Stay inside if at all possible. And hey, guys, it's Valentine's Day. Snuggle up on the couch with your honey. That's a good time to do that. All right. Everybody have a good week. Bye-bye.